I got a couple things to decide. Should I you and wait for him, or should I wait for him and
spent the best years of my life in the penitentiary? I wasted my whole
talking when I said that. And I didn't know about going viral.
At 69, Clifton Powell just confirmed the terrible allegations about the case that nearly destroyed his career. And what he's revealing has people questioning everything they thought they knew. Because for over a decade, the actor has carried the weight of accusations that followed him from Louisiana courtrooms to Hollywood casting calls. A 2013 sexual assault lawsuit that disappeared without explanation.
Somebody accused me of raping them or hurting them. I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
But it wasn't just the legal battle that changed everything. It was the way Powell's entire reputation shifted overnight. From respected character actor to industry pariah. The way major studio offers dried up. The way his name became synonymous with controversy instead of craft.
If you do the history of Hollywood, a lot of us start out great and end up bad.
And now, after more than a decade, Powell is addressing the allegations head-on, revealing details about the case, the settlement, and the Hollywood machine that he says tried to bury him alive. Clifton Powell wasn't new to the spotlight in 2013. He'd already built a decades-long resume full of complex, aggressive, and deeply emotional performances, the kind of roles that made him unforgettable. But when a woman in Louisiana filed a lawsuit against him for alleged sexual assault, it wasn't his acting that people were talking about anymore. The woman claimed that in 2011, Powell had traveled to Louisiana for an event. According to her civil complaint, she and Powell had engaged in what started as a consensual encounter, but quickly turned into something else. The lawsuit stated she repeatedly told him to stop. She said he didn't.
Somebody accused me of raping them or hurting them. I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
Powell denied everything. He didn't just brush off the accusation. He firmly stated that the encounter was fully consensual and that the lawsuit was motivated by money. His legal team argued there was no basis for criminal charges, and in fact, no criminal charges were ever filed. But despite the denial and the absence of criminal proceedings, the damage was already done. The headline stuck. And the outcome? That's what really sparked the rumors. Because unlike many civil lawsuits where a settlement or dismissal is publicized, Powell's case just disappeared. There was no high-profile court date, no camera crews at the courthouse, no definitive win or loss. The lack of closure gave the internet all the room it needed to fill in the blanks. For some, that meant assuming Powell paid her off. For others, it meant believing she fabricated the story and quietly backed away. But for most people, it left a fog around Powell's reputation that never quite cleared. To this day, if you Google Clifton Powell lawsuit, the first thing you'll see is a summary of the case, no resolution. Just the accusation, just the reminder. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Powell was in a unique space, a respected character actor who never broke into A-list territory but was always working. He had just appeared in Ray as Jeff Brown, a performance that critics loved. He was finally being talked about for his depth, not just his intensity.
Ray, you're the leader, man. Be one. Come on now.
You know what, Jeff? I mean, things are...
But then came the case. Then came the speculation. What made it even harder to navigate was Powell's silence. He didn't sit down for a tell-all interview. He didn't issue a press release apologizing or doubling down. Apart from a few brief legal statements and a couple of vague denials in interviews, he chose not to fuel the fire. But in today's media environment, silence is often seen as guilt. Still, when fans looked at Powell's filmography after 2013, they noticed a change. Fewer major studio projects, more low-budget indie films, more faith-based movies and underground releases. Whether by choice or necessity, his career seemed to shrink in public view, and many people wondered if the lawsuit had something to do with that. For Powell, the accusation may have been one chapter in a long, complicated life. But for the people watching from the outside, it became a defining moment, one he still hasn't fully escaped. And it wouldn't be the last time the line between his real life and his on-screen persona would come under fire. Clifton Powell didn't set out to be typecast, but by the mid-90s, he had mastered one thing better than most: making people believe he was dangerous. Whether it was the brutal, manipulative Chauncey in Menace II Society, or the cold, calculating Cuddy in Dead Presidents, Powell had a presence that stayed with you long after the credits rolled. He wasn't just acting, he was transforming. Audiences believed him, directors relied on him, and casting agents, they kept calling for the same thing. But as time went on, that reputation started to bleed into something else. Some people started to believe Powell wasn't just playing a villain. They started to assume he was one, especially when real-life accusations like the 2013 lawsuit started to surface.
And I think what I would love the general public to understand is before you make a comment about my work and how many bad guys I play, go research, do your research. I play Dr. Martin Luther King and Selma Lord.
The problem is, Hollywood doesn't always reward nuance. In an industry where image is everything, being too convincing as the villain can become a curse. Powell was so good at playing dangerous characters that for some people, it made the sexual assault lawsuit feel believable. He tried to push back. In interviews, he argued that black actors often aren't given the same range of opportunity. He said he wasn't picking the same roles over and over. Those were just the roles he was offered.
I did one movie, and let me address this.
Okay.
I did one movie, Women Thou Art Loosed, and they called me because somebody else, the lead actor, dropped out.
That frustration was real, because while actors like Denzel Washington or Don Cheadle found ways to balance serious dramas with mainstream success, Powell stayed locked in the street genre, the gritty urban underworld stories that were popular in the 90s and early 2000s. To many fans, he became that guy. The one who shows up halfway through a movie to shoot someone, threaten someone, or ruin someone's life. And critics weren't always kind. Some called him a one-note performer. Others said he lacked the subtlety for bigger roles. There were accusations that he overacted, especially in lower-budget films, that he chewed the scenery, that he couldn't escape the stereotype because he leaned into it too hard. Powell knew what people were saying, and it bothered him. Not because he didn't think he could do more, but because he wasn't being given the chance to. That's why, when people started linking his real-life behavior to his on-screen image, it struck a nerve. The idea that playing violent men somehow made him one. That because he played an abuser, he must be an abuser. Still, that line kept blurring. And after the 2013 lawsuit, the public didn't draw a clear separation. The case wasn't about Chauncey or Cuddy or any other character Powell had played. But in the court of public opinion, it felt like just another scene in the same script. By the time he was in his 50s and 60s, Powell started pivoting, taking roles in Christian films, guest starring in TV shows as pastors and fathers. But even then, people still whispered about the past, still judged him for the way he delivered a line, still remembered him as the man from Menace II Society before anything else. His acting was supposed to be art, but instead, it became ammunition. And the truth is, no matter how much he tried to change the narrative, the damage of being seen as the villain was already done. Because what people see in movies, in headlines, in lawsuits, often becomes the only version of truth they believe. Even before the 2013 lawsuit put Clifton Powell's name in the headlines for the wrong reasons, there was already quiet industry chatter surrounding his presence on set. Though never the subject of a major on-set scandal or misconduct report, Powell has been discussed in online forums and low-profile interviews as someone with a serious and intense demeanor, the kind of actor who takes his craft personally. But there's a difference between being passionate and being difficult. And while no major outlet has accused Powell of inappropriate behavior on set, some anonymous claims over the years have painted a picture of a man who doesn't shy away from confrontation if things aren't going right. A 2018 Reddit thread in Our Movies, in a discussion about underrated black actors, included multiple anonymous users claiming Powell was professional but intense, and hard to read unless you knew him well. One comment suggested he was very direct during filming and didn't tolerate disorganization. Of course, these are not verified, and Powell has never publicly responded to any behind-the-scenes rumors. What is documented is Powell's clear stance on work ethic. In a 2018 Vlad TV interview, he said, "I'm very serious about my craft. I take it seriously. I come in prepared." That intensity, combined with the types of roles Powell is known for, menacing, aggressive, emotionally explosive, often created a perception that he was like those characters off-camera too. In another interview with The Breakfast Club in 2016, Powell addressed the misconception head-on. "People see me on screen and think I'm that guy. But I'm not Chauncey, man. I'm an actor. That's it." Still, in an industry that thrives on reputation, even small rumors can have a long shelf life. In any case, there are no confirmed reports of Powell being fired from a set or reprimanded for his behavior. But his shift in work, from bigger budget studio films like Ray and Norbit to smaller, straight-to-video projects, did not go unnoticed. Some industry blogs speculated that Powell's lack of diplomacy behind the scenes may have contributed to fewer high-profile roles as time went on.
Like, man, you know what I'm saying? Gotta hear with that. It's a character. It's not real.
His bluntness has become a hallmark of his public persona. To some, it's admirable. To others, especially in Hollywood's polished PR environment, it may have been a liability. While there are no documented cases of on-set misconduct, the perception that Powell is difficult, fueled by anonymous anecdotes and the shadow of his more aggressive characters, has lingered for years. And perception, in this business, can be just as impactful as fact. By the mid-2010s, Powell's resume was still growing, but the roles had changed. More pastors, more faith-based films, more safe characters that didn't require the volatility he'd once been known for. Whether that pivot was personal, strategic, or circumstantial is unclear. But what is clear is that Powell, by then, was aware of the image people had formed around him. He never apologized for being intense. He never denied that he brought heat to the room, but he also never confirmed the rumors. Because, as Powell has often said, he lets the work speak for itself. In the early 2000s, Clifton Powell had built a solid reputation. He was working alongside A-list talent, starring in films like Ray, Norbit, and Next Friday. But as time went on, something changed. The roles didn't stop. They just started looking very different. One glance at his filmography shows what happened. Powell began appearing in a wave of low-budget films, crime dramas, urban thrillers, direct-to-video releases. There were years where he appeared in 5, sometimes 6 movies, back-to-back. Not because he was slipping, but because he was everywhere. The volume of work was impressive, but the shift in quality didn't go unnoticed. Gone were the big studio productions. In their place were titles that barely made it to theaters. Projects that didn't have the budgets, the marketing, or the polish to showcase what Powell was really capable of. And that created a problem. For some people, his name on a film became a red flag. Not because of his performance, Powell always gave it his all, but because the films themselves weren't connecting with wider audiences. They felt rushed, formulaic, and often featured Powell in similar roles: the angry father, the neighborhood villain, the rough authority figure. But Powell never shied away from explaining his choices. In interviews, he's talked about why he says yes to so many roles. He's not chasing luxury. He's chasing opportunity. For him, staying visible has always been part of survival in an industry that doesn't always offer second chances. He's also said that many of these smaller projects gave him a way to support independent filmmakers. Sometimes the budgets were tight. Sometimes the scripts weren't great. But Powell showed up, delivered the work, and helped get those films made. It was never about chasing awards. It was about helping people finish what they started. Still, there were consequences. As more of these films came out, the perception around Powell began to shift. Even though he had the talent and the resume to back it up, he started to be seen as someone who worked too much, someone who didn't say no often enough. And in Hollywood, taking too many roles can be just as damaging as not working at all. The other issue was repetition. Many of these smaller films had Powell playing variations of the same character: stern, angry, emotional. It became harder for people to separate the roles from the actor, and even harder to imagine him doing something different. By the mid-2010s, Powell's focus had also expanded into faith-based films and family-centered projects. While these roles were a departure from the violent characters he was known for, the movies still didn't reach the same level of acclaim. They were often limited releases with specific audiences, and rarely brought him back into the mainstream spotlight. Through all of this, Powell kept working. He never stopped, but the shift was clear. The man who once shared the screen with Jamie Foxx in Ray was now buried under a long list of smaller titles most people hadn't even heard of. He was still showing up, still acting, still giving everything to the camera. But the projects weren't doing the same for him. But before the roles, before the Hollywood spotlight, before the controversies, Powell was just a kid from Southeast Washington, D.C. And the streets he grew up on, they were nothing like a movie set. That pressure, that tension, it never really left him. And maybe that's why he plays it so well. When Powell steps into a character that's violent or unhinged, he's not guessing how it feels. He's pulling from real life, from the people he watched growing up, from the rage he saw in broken homes, from the fear he felt walking home late at night. That emotional rawness, the sharp tone, the 1,000-yard stare, the buried trauma. It's not an act, it's memory. And that's part of what makes his acting so convincing.
I got a couple things to decide. Should I you and wait for him, or should I wait for him?
But it also blurs the line between what's performance and what's personal. Coming from that background, Powell developed a mindset that's all about self-protection. He's not soft-spoken. He's not overly polished. He's blunt, direct, and sometimes aggressively honest. He learned early on that being too quiet can get you overlooked, or worse. And as his fame grew, so did his guard. Then there are the reports that he's difficult or too much on set. The moments when he clapped back hard in interviews, the lawsuit, the defensiveness, the tension that seems to follow him. To some, it all feels like a pattern, but when you zoom out, it looks more like a survival tactic. The habits of a man who never had the luxury of relaxing. Even when Powell broke into Hollywood, he was still carrying Southeast DC in his bones. That grit, that defensiveness, that edge, it didn't fade. It just got sharper. And the more success he found, the more it seemed like he had to defend it. Especially as a black actor in an industry that's quick to replace you the moment you show emotion. By the time the lawsuit came and the accusations started flying, Powell had already been fighting for his place in a system that never really embraced him fully. The lawsuit wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was a test, a public one. And it reminded people just how intense he really was, even off camera. But maybe that intensity isn't just part of his image. Maybe it's the result of a life that never gave him a chance to be anything else. Clifton Powell spent most of his career flying under the radar, even when he was playing big roles, even when his face was instantly recognizable from a dozen gritty films. He wasn't the kind of celebrity getting chased by paparazzi. He liked it that way. No red carpet scandals, no viral meltdowns, just the work. Intense, raw, and real. But all of that changed when his son fell in love with Sasha Obama. Yes, that Sasha, the daughter of Barack and Michelle Obama, one of the most high-profile families in the world. And suddenly, Clifton Powell, the same man who'd spent decades keeping his private life out of the headlines, was now in the middle of a media frenzy. Photos started popping up on gossip sites. Headlines like, "Sasha Obama's new boyfriend revealed," spread fast. At the center of it, Clifton Powell Jr., a young man trying to build his own career in directing and writing. And right behind him, his famous dad, whose name was now being searched again, but for all the wrong reasons.
So Sasha Obama has a boyfriend, and now we know who he is. It is Clifton Powell Jr. He's the son of Clifton Powell.
Yeah! For Clifton, it was a strange moment. The public wasn't just interested in his son. They were interested in him too. Not because of his work, but because people were digging into his past. The lawsuit resurfaced. The rumors about his temperament came back up. His name started trending for the first time in years. And not because of a movie role. And for a man who had fought so hard to protect his peace, that attention hit different. He didn't ask for it. He wasn't chasing clout. And unlike other actors who might have used the moment for exposure, Clifton kept quiet. He gave no interviews about the relationship. He didn't post about it. He didn't use it to leverage his own brand. He stayed back, watching as strangers picked apart his family, his son, and himself. Some people thought he was lucky, that having a connection to the Obamas could boost his profile. But Clifton didn't see it that way. For him, fame was never something you celebrate. Fame was pressure. Fame was scrutiny. Fame was the thing that could ruin you if you weren't ready. And now, his family was in the middle of it. In the few times he did speak about it, Clifton made it clear he was proud of his son. He said Powell Jr. was focused, creative, and respectful. He supported the relationship.
We love the Obamas, but Mr. Obama has a daughter that's dating my son, and I have an opportunity and a responsibility to make my son responsible, gentle, kind, loving.
But he also admitted something deeper. He wasn't comfortable with the spotlight suddenly landing on them. Not like that. Not from that angle. Because once the press starts digging, they don't stop. Every past role, every controversy, every comment, it all gets recycled. And when you've spent your life building a wall between your career and your personal life, that kind of exposure feels invasive. For years, Clifton Powell was able to control how people saw him. He was the actor, the tough guy, the scene stealer. People didn't know who he dated, where he lived, or what his kids looked like. He kept his life in compartments, the art over here, the family over there. But now those walls were coming down. It wasn't just about public perception anymore, it was about legacy. What would people remember him for? The roles? The lawsuit? His connection to the Obamas? He didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear. Being connected to power didn't bring protection. If anything, it brought more pressure, more attention, more chances for his past to be reopened. And for a man who'd fought so long to control his image, the most unexpected plot twist of all was this. He was now part of someone else's narrative. Clifton Powell turned 69 in 2024, and after nearly 4 decades in the business, the question isn't whether he's talented, it's how, or if, he'll be remembered the way he wants. Because Powell isn't a background actor. He's not a face you forget. From the minute he appeared on screen in Menace to Society, audiences took notice. Not because he was flashy, but because he could command a room with a single look. The problem is, that look has followed him everywhere. For years, Powell played characters that were dangerous, intimidating, or unstable. And while those performances were powerful, they helped cement a stereotype he's still trying to shake. Even now, many viewers think of him first as Chauncey or Cuddy, not as Clifton Powell, the artist. And that's something he's publicly addressed. That's not just a career problem, it's a legacy problem. And then came the lawsuit. In 2013, the civil case filed against Powell, though never criminally prosecuted, became one of the first things people mentioned when they searched his name. The case never went to trial. There were no criminal charges, but the accusation left a mark that Powell has never fully erased. To this day, the outcome remains unclear, and that uncertainty has fed into public speculation. For some people, the absence of a conviction means he was falsely accused. For others, the mere existence of the case is enough to question his character. Powell has addressed the media's role in that perception. in interviews where he stated clearly, "Once they put your name next to something like that, you carry it forever." And it's true. Even now, more than a decade later, when Powell is discussed online or brought up in commentary videos, that case still gets mentioned, often without context and rarely with fairness. But Powell hasn't stopped. Not after the lawsuit, not after the industry changed, not after his name was dragged through blogs and YouTube titles that value shock over nuance. He's still working, still booking roles, still speaking up. In recent years, he's focused more on mentorship and community work. He's been involved with youth programs and has said that if he leaves anything behind, it should be more than just movies. And maybe that's the real answer to the legacy question. Because Clifton Powell was never handed anything. He didn't coast on fame. He didn't rely on studios to save him. He worked constantly, relentlessly, even when the projects weren't perfect and the headlines weren't kind. He may never be an A-lister. He may never escape the roles that shaped him or the case that haunts him. But his story? It's not over. Not by a long shot.